Good afternoon and welcome to the third in the C4L series of webinars entitled Cloud from a Business Perspective. Today we're going to be focusing on public versus private versus hybrid cloud models. We're going to start off by defining what we mean by these three different types of cloud and then do a bit of comparison and analysis as to why you would choose the different variants for your organisation. Prior to starting, I'm going to launch a poll very quickly just to see what type of cloud everyone is currently using. So I'm going to launch that now. The options you've got are public, private or hybrid cloud, you don't know, or that you don't use the cloud. So I'll leave that open just for a few seconds just to get an idea of our audience today and where they are at with their cloud models. Okay, I'll give that just a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close that and I'll share the results with everybody. As you can see, a certain amount of people not using the cloud at the moment, and then a mix between public and private cloud options. Right, firstly, just a brief introduction to who C4L are. We were founded in the year 2000, you can see. We do a range of services, as we've listed down below: co-location, connectivity, cloud and communications. Very data center centric, spread across 40 different data centers across the UK and Europe, and obviously been very successful and grown very quickly during the period from when we started to now. Myself, my name is Treacy. I'm a pre-sales technical consultant for the organisation. I specialise in technology surrounding sort of Cisco and VMware predominantly. I'd call myself probably a site cloud fanatic, hence be talking on the subject, and I currently hold VCP 5 or VMware Certified Professional 5. As I mentioned, this is the third in the series of C4L Webinars, Cloud from a Business Perspective. The previous two, one which was an introduction and the second one which was focusing on cloud security, are both available on YouTube. There are links there, and I'm happy to send those to you after this presentation if you wish. If people do have any questions throughout any of this, there is the availability to either ask questions directly to me, or you can ask them publicly so everyone can see, and I will also give periods throughout for people to for me to answer those questions for people. Okay, so let's start off with the very basics. There's a lot of different definitions for cloud out there and a lot of different interpretations of what it means. These sort of two brief descriptions are what we're going to be using really to focus on today. So IT services without the need to buy or manage infrastructure, and delivers computing as a service rather than as a product. And the specific element of cloud we're going to be dealing with today is IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. We've got a definition here from searchcloudcomputing.com. IaaS is the outsourcing of equipment used to support operations including storage, hardware, servers and networking components. And what we'll do now is just show where that sits in what we call the SPI model. So it's software as a service, platform as a service and infrastructure as a service makes up the SPI. Starting on the right hand side we have the software as a service stack, and an example of this would be something like Gmail, where you have no interaction at all with the hardware or the platform, or indeed the software. You merely are accessing it in that particular case through a web browser. As we move down the stack, we have a look at platform as a service. That'd be something like force.com, and on the far left hand side, infrastructure service, which is the component we're going to be focusing on today, where you have removal from the burden of hardware ownership and the abstraction layer as well. So moving on to definitions of the different types of cloud models, first we're going to look at public cloud. We've got a definition again here, this time from VMware. Delivers computing as a service rather than as a product, whereby shared resources are provided over a network. The main advantages, or the big sort of headline advantages of the public cloud model are, as we've got listed here: reduced costs, increased resilience potentially, and most importantly here, increased flexibility. The ability to very, very dynamically grow your online infrastructure very, very quickly, very easily, and very cost effectively. And that's really one of the big things that's brought cloud computing to the fore. We've got just a high-level diagram there showing a potential way that it is accessed, in the data center via the internet from your organization. Right, moving on to private cloud. This time a quote from the National Institute of Science and Technology. Private cloud is infrastructure operated solely for a single organization, whether managed internally or by a third party and hosted internally or externally. Quite a lot of get-outs there really in that definition, but what the main point is trying to get at is that the infrastructure is purely utilised by a single organisation. So it could be in a data centre the same as a public cloud model, it could be managed and the equipment could be owned by a third party, and you're taking that as a service, but you'd be the only organisation utilising that underlying hardware. And that is the big main distinction between the private cloud and the public cloud models. As we've listed here, some of the sort of reasons for looking at the private cloud are increased control, increased performance, and increased security. That's not necessarily to say that a public cloud isn't secure, but it may be if you are very stringently regulated in terms of accreditations and security protocols. You might be an FSA regulated organisation or something. You may have a component of some standards you adhere to that says you must have dedicated equipment purely for your organisation. It may be something as simple as you are retaining customer data and that cannot be on a shared platform, in which case you would have to look at potentially a private cloud model. So let's just do a little bit of analysis between the two, public cloud versus private cloud. As I mentioned, the main distinction between the two here is that equipment is dedicated for a single organisation or it is shared amongst several. If you want to have a look at it, private cloud models can reside at your organisation's headquarters or one of your offices. It can also reside in the data centre, whereas public clouds must always be off-site to be truly defined as a public cloud, most commonly within the data centre environment. As you mentioned, public cloud can give you the full range of benefits that cloud technology can offer, particularly that flexibility that we spoke about, the ability to dynamically grow and shrink the resources you need. But, it is a big but, there are still reasons why people would look to utilise private cloud models, and there's sort of three big ones there: control, performance and security. So let's have a look at hybrid cloud, what some people would deem the middle ground. There seems to be quite a lot of confusion surrounding hybrid cloud, more than any of the other models, and I think some of it is that interpretation has been very much simplified around this. The diagram we've got here, which you will have seen probably several of them around if you've gone and typed in hybrid cloud into Google, it very much simplifies what it's about. It purely puts it as a middle ground between private and public cloud, and where it sort of often is pitched as a bridging option is implied that hybrid cloud is purely there to allow you to transition from private into public cloud. Not necessarily entirely true, that some organisations may actually look specifically to have a hybrid cloud model and retain that as a long-term solution, not just a short interim bridging solution. So what we're going to try and do is add a bit more flesh to this hybrid cloud definition and our understanding of this model. So for this one, I myself wrote a definition for it. Infrastructure that combines a mixture of shared and dedicated equipment, irrespective of location or ownership. I've given myself a few get-outs in there as well, but the main point I'm trying to get at with this is that it is a combination of having dedicated resources purely for your organisation and some that are shared resources. Some of those might sit in your organisation, it may be that none of those do. Some of those may be managed by yourselves, some may be managed elsewhere, they may all be managed elsewhere. But you have that mix of dedicated and shared resources. And we've got a diagram just to try and go to a little bit, again, more flesh on what we're talking about here. So you can see the relationship between the private cloud and the public cloud, and if you move in as the arrows show, from the private cloud towards the public cloud, you're going to get some of those benefits potentially: resilience, increased flexibility, and potentially making it more cost effective. As you start to move further away from the public cloud towards the private cloud, you're going to potentially get increased security, increased control, and increased performance. And that's where we're going to get our middle ground, our hybrid cloud sitting there. Right, I'm just going to have a very brief break here just to see if anyone has any questions that I can pick up on at this point. If you haven't at the moment, there will be another period at the end to ask any questions that you have. Okay, no problem at all. As I said, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask them. I'll pick up on those at the end, and you can ask those publicly or privately. Right, so reasons to choose a hybrid cloud. Predominantly the reason you would select a hybrid cloud is if you want to get one of those advantages we spoke about in the private cloud, namely security, control or performance. And you want to have one of those advantages on one or more parts of your infrastructure. An example of this, if we take the performance option here, would be if you've got very, very intensive database servers that you need to guarantee I/O performance on, for example. You might look to take some resources for those databases as dedicated equipment purely to you to guarantee that I/O performance. It's not necessarily the public cloud option wouldn't be appropriate for that. It's just that you need to guarantee that performance 24 hours a day, which you can do by having the dedicated equipment there. It may be the rest of your infrastructure is sitting in the public cloud model. That would be a good example of a hybrid cloud. So the instant thing a lot of people start to think here is that the hybrid cloud is the perfect scenario for everybody. It gives you a lot of those advantages of private cloud, but some of the advantages of public cloud, therefore it's the default selection. No, sadly, all the potential advantage you get from it, if you look at it in one sense, so increased performance, security, etc., you can look at it in the opposite way, and it can provide less resilience, less flexibility, and potentially higher costs than a public cloud model. So what you really need to be asking here is, do I need those improvements? Are they relevant to my business? Am I going to get something out of that? So you do need to have a look at it in it's not just a simple yes and no, do I look at hybrid cloud models? So this is where we've sort of put together some of these questions here you need to consider when looking at your cloud setup. It's in no way an exhaustive list of things you should be asking, and there's going to be several questions that could be very specific to your organisation that you would add on the bottom of this. They're definitely things you want to be considering. I mean, if we take a few of these here, what equipment needs to be on-site or off-site? Do you have the space and the facilities on-site to house mission-critical equipment? If not, it needs to be in a data centre. Well, then you might be wanting to have a look at, do I outsource this? One of the big ones at the moment here, what budget do you have? It's very important for a lot of organisations now more than ever, and it goes sort of cap in hand with the next point we've got here, which is, can you consider both CapEx and OpEx models? If you have the ability to look at both, then you can potentially have a look at a private cloud, which is potentially going to have some kind of hardware acquisition or larger setups, or a hybrid cloud model, which may have some of those as well. If you look at public cloud, though, very commonly it's purely OpEx. You're just paying on a month or a quarterly basis for the services that you have. You also may want to have a look here as well at some of the other things we've got. What performance do all areas of your infrastructure require? If those can all be met by the public cloud, then do you really need to consider the additional costs when looking at a hybrid or private cloud option? So wrapping things up a little bit here with a conclusion. Sadly, like most areas of IT and indeed life, there is no simple answer. We've listed some of the questions you want to ask. You obviously need to do some analysis yourself, but to just have a look at some of these points here. What do you hope to achieve from your infrastructure or your infrastructure renew if you've got large infrastructure at the moment, but you're looking at transitioning? Who will rely upon it? It's a very important thing. Do they have adequate bandwidth if you've got satellite offices to be able to access all the services off-site? If they do, then you can look to host everything off-site and gain the advantages of that. It may be you need to retain some elements of your infrastructure on-site. You also need to have a look and really, this is probably the most important element, the last one we've put here, take a consultative approach. Really look at what you want to achieve, what you have at the moment, what your budget and the availability of that budget is, and really have a look at a proper consultative approach to this to make sure you get the right result for your business. Take advantage of the pluses of those various different models to make them work for you and try and minimise the disadvantages. So I'm going to open it up again for any questions people have. I think I've got one here. I've got one specifically about costings from one of the people who's watching today, and what I'll probably do is ask you just to drop me an email and I can give you some rough idea of costings for different models after this, rather than sort of talking about specifics on costings in this. Any other questions relating specifically to the things that we had covered today? I've had one here. How long will it take to implement a transition? That would depend very much what you are transitioning from and to, without trying to exonerate myself from answering that. If you are if you are transitioning from a private cloud to a public cloud model, it may be that that could be very easily done depending on the technologies you're using. If you are, at the moment, you have a VMware-based, for example, private cloud, it could be very easy to move into a VMware-based public cloud offering from a provider. So that sort of thing can be facilitated very easily if you're looking at something like OVF file format to be able to transition. Depending on what you've got at the moment, obviously if you have very little infrastructure, then you can start from scratch and you can build what you want. So it's not so much a transition, but it's more starting, and you can move over some of the services you've got. Use that consultative approach and also lean on your cloud provider. Ask them about various points and things they can do to help you with that transition, and also things they would recommend for it. So not a simple answer to that one. It can be very, very easy in some instances. It can be more complicated depending on the size of your infrastructure. Just had one here, another one. What type of internet is required to give good performance? Which is very similar to it. Somebody else has asked a different question here. Typically, how are people connecting to the cloud via the internet or private circuits or MPLS? So these are very similar sort of questions, so I'll answer them both together. What internet is required for good performance and how are people connecting to it? At the moment, for the connectivity options, there's a range of different ways people are accessing it. A lot depends on what you are accessing. If you are using thin client or something like that, it may be you've got very limited bandwidth to be able to access that. If you are literally taking all of your infrastructure and you're putting it off-site and you're accessing large files and things, you're obviously going to need much larger amounts of bandwidth. The other thing to have a look at is also business quality internet connectivity as well. So taking circuits that are synchronous, they have the same speeds up and download, and also have low contention rates to guarantee that performance if you're now going to rely on all your infrastructure off the site. Talking about the types of connectivity people have, we've seen a mix depending on the type of operations people are setting up. Companies that are far more heavily regulated are starting to look at private connectivity, so you can have direct connectivity from your office into the data center and connecting directly to your cloud, which doesn't touch the internet. This is very popular amongst, as I sort of mentioned earlier on, FSA regulated organizations or people who adhere to ISO 27001 security accreditation. So that's becoming far more common and far more popular in those situations. Some organizations, though, will just use the internet to access it, and they'll set up site-to-site VPN using firewalling or other security options to try and make sure that all connections are secure. Another question here, are there challenges around latency? This very much depends on what you are accessing. If you are accessing services that are latency dependent, then obviously you do need to have a look at the type of connectivity you've got. If they are not, if it's file-based things, then latency isn't necessarily quite so important. And that also comes down to what I mentioned as well about having uncontended services and synchronous bandwidth as well can get around some of those latency issues. If your cloud provider is a UK-based cloud provider, the chances are that the cloud services are not going to be horrendously far away from wherever your offices are if you're UK-based, so that latency shouldn't be too much of an issue. If, however, the cloud provider is hosting your cloud services abroad, it may be that you get a lot more problems. So you do want to be asking them really where's my data and where are my services going to be administered from. Looks like all the questions we've got for the moment. If anyone does think of any others, I'm just going to pop my details on screen there. Feel free to drop me an email or follow me on Twitter if you want to get some information about upcoming webinars. We've got one more to come in this series, which will be coming up in the near future, which I will make announcements for. Also, if people would like a copy of the slides from today, please feel free to drop me an email and we can send those over to you. And lastly to mention, our marketing department has put together a report on transitioning to cloud models. So if people would like to get a copy of that, it's quite a good read. You can drop me an email as well, and I'm happy to have that sent out to you. I'll leave my details on screen just for a couple of minutes more. But yeah, if anyone wants to get in contact, please feel free to do so. If not, I look forward to having you with us next time for the fourth and final webinar in this series. Thank you.
Welcome to Go to